Welcome back. Today is day 2 of my Advent tea adventure, my Advent teayer, as I have been calling it. So today we are just continuing along in our David's Tea Advent calendar here, the loose leaf. So we're going to go ahead and open day 2. So again, this is what that box looks like. And all right, day 2 is up here. So today is an organic cinnamon rooibos chai. Let's see if I can get that. It's going to reflect pretty badly here, but that is what I am working with today. So you can kind of see through the tin here. It's pretty brown, and I will apologize in advance for my cats being on the counter and jumping around. So let's go ahead and look at the ingredients on this particular one. This is going to have organic rooibos, organic cinnamon, organic apple, natural cinnamon flavoring. It is kosher, and it is also fair trade certified. So that's pretty cool. One thing that I did notice that I didn't realize yesterday is that on the back of this box for each of the teas, it does provide a recommended preparation for it. So yesterday's recommended brewing would be at 85 degrees Celsius, 185 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 to 4 minutes to let it steep. I know I let mine steep a little bit longer, and that may have affected some of that oiliness that I had on the surface of the tea. But always something to keep in mind is what that recommended best taste brewing situation is. For today, it is recommended at 95 degrees Celsius or 200 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 to 5 minutes. So I'm going to try to keep a little bit closer to that today. We will see what I can do about that. I have already heated the water before starting the filming again. I'll probably go ahead and hit it again just so that way as I talk about the tea itself and what it looks like, I can actually give it a little bit of time to come down from what it needs to be as far as just a little bit less than that boiling temperature. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do that real quick. Put the tea aside. All right, so while that heats up, let's see if I can, there we go. This one was screwed on pretty tightly. So this one, immediately, I smell cinnamon. And with the cinnamon in the name of this particular tea, I would expect to smell cinnamon really prominently, and I do. So that's very much delivering on its promise there. And as I realized after I was putting the video together yesterday, those big bark chunks yesterday were actually chunks of cinnamon, and I can see those already in the mix here for today's. So I'm going to go ahead and pop over to the other camera and show you what that looks like. It's very fine grained tea today. I'm probably going to have to change my method of how I steep the tea. Otherwise, it's just going to slide straight through my tea ball. So you can see, as I've already said, it's brown. This is a very, very brown tea. It's got, some of those more reddish brown chunks in there, some blondish brown chunks, which is going to be that rooibos. Rooibos is kind of a red tea is how it's often termed. And then, yes, this here is a cinnamon chunk of the actual stick there. So overall, it's exactly as you would expect it to look. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a paper tea bag and these were actually given to me a while ago. It's just a little paper bag, kind of like the kind of paper you'd get for a coffee filter, so you could probably make your own if you really wanted to. Interestingly enough, these little tea bags are actually also David's tea. So that's actually pretty fitting here. So I'm going to go ahead and dump that in. Makes a nice full thing. A little disappointed because you won't be able to see it too well, but it should still create just a fine steep. All right. So while I let the water cool down, it just came back up to that boil, so just up to that 100 degrees Celsius. I'm going to go ahead and chat a little bit about today's tea with you. Predominantly, the ingredients in today's tea are that rooibos and cinnamon. I'm going to talk about rooibos with one of my other teas that I happen to know has rooibos on it because I looked at the teas. I don't know which day it is, but I do know that one of them is another rooibos. So I'll talk about rooibos then, just so that way I don't exhaust everything. In terms of cinnamon, there is a lot to talk about with regards to cinnamon. So I'm going to have to make this a multi-part exploration into things about cinnamon because I did not know nearly this much about it out there. So first and foremost, most of the cinnamon that we consume in the international commerce is produced in Indonesia and China. And those two countries combined produce about 75% of the world's supply of cinnamon. So that tells you a little bit about where you would expect to find cinnamon if you were looking for how to naturally source it. You're not going to really find it in the northern hemisphere traditionally unless you're closer to the equator, which China and, or at least parts of China and India and Indonesia are much closer to the equator than we are here in the continental US, which is where I am. So I will not ever be able to grow cinnamon. Not that I would probably be able to anyway. I kill most plants. So with regards to cinnamon, there are actually two different species that we predominantly consume when we think of cinnamon. You have the cinnamon verum, or the cinnamon cassia, and their full names are Cinnamomum verum and Cinnamomum cassia. And again, most of what we are going to consume internationally is actually the cassia, even though the Cinnamomum verum is considered true cinnamon. So I found that a little interesting, but those are the two ones in that same genus that we actually do consume. So as you should know, cinnamon is a spice. It is obtained from the tree bark of those plants. So that tells you a lot about also the plant itself. It's going to be woody. It's going to be pretty solid there. And cinnamon, as far as the name is concerned, like the word cinnamon, it has a lot of evolutions as it has gone through human history until we have our English word cinnamon. We have the first occurrence of cinnamon as we know it appearing in the 15th century in English for that. And it does come from the Greek word cinnamomum, which tells you it derives some of its actual specific species name from Greek, which of course borrows into Latin, and then there was the medieval French and the Norman invasion, 1066, all that kind of stuff of how English itself evolved. But when it comes to the Greek word cinnamomon, it came from the Phoenicians, like a great deal of Greek culture, as I have come to learn through listening to the YouTube videos my husband watches. And the Phoenicians, in turn, somewhat borrowed that word that they had from the Hebrew language. And they had kinemon, or I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that, but it is spelled with a Q, so it might be chin. Not fully sure on that one, but it does look recognizably like cinnamon, or with that harder pronunciation of the kin, like the Greeks had. And when cinnamon starts appearing in human civilization, it finds its way to Egypt, documented as early as 2000 BC. And that is partly where humans started to distinguish a little bit between the cinnamon cassia and the cinnamon verum, that true cinnamon, because there was a record that indicated that it had come from China. But what they were actually thinking about was the cassia, rather than the verum. So there's a little bit of some of that confusion, which tells you that they are, of course, related plants, as we now know. In the ancient world, it was so highly prized that it was deemed a gift fit for monarchs or for the gods. So this might contribute to some of the reasons why the Egyptians actually used cinnamon in their mummification process, and why even many Romans would use it when they were creating funeral pyres. It was considered that valuable, that precious, kind of like that payment into the underworld sort of thing. In Rome, actually, 1 Roman pound of cinnamon cassia would have cost, at least according to Pliny the Elder, 1,500 denarii, which was the equivalent of 50 months of salary. 50. However, when you look at Diocletian's text, Diocletian quotes a price in 301, that's the year, of 125 denarii. And so when you consider that a day's work paid you 25 denarii, you're looking at a full 5 days of work to get a pound of cinnamon cassia. Now, granted, I don't really know what I would do with a pound of cinnamon. I just buy the little tins, like most people, and that lasts me most of a year, and that's, like what, $3, maybe $5 if I go with the super fancy, not supermarket brand cinnamon. So I'm not really sure what people did with that much cinnamon, unless, of course, you are looking at the fact that people did use it in funeral rites. So there's that to consider. But it was expensive. And it's thought that Emperor Nero burned a year's worth of the entire city of Rome's supply of cinnamon. An entire city's year's supply. They think he burned it all for his wife's funeral in the year 65. Common Era, AD, whichever one you want to go with. So that seems to be along the lines of that real extravagance and way over the top. And hopefully no one else needed to bury anyone or have a funeral pyre, because I guess they were SOL with all the cinnamon being taken by the emperor. But again, if it's fit for monarchs, then it makes sense that the emperor would have first dibs. However, that makes me think that gentlemen nowadays should probably be rethinking those engagement plans, right? I mean, diamonds might be a girl's best friend, but if cinnamon is fit for the gods, what kind of message are you really trying to say? Are you marrying a girl or are you marrying a goddess, right? No, just me. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start steeping that tea, and then I want to chat a little bit about what fair trade certified means, because this is the first tea that I've encountered. It's day 2, so makes sense. But it's the first tea I've encountered in my Advent sat here that is fair trade certified, and like I said, cat. So enjoy that. And today I opted obviously not to measure, even though I had a measuring cup sitting right there. But since I'm using the same teacup, just washed out, that I did yesterday, I figure it's about the same level. So again, that's going to be about 6 ounces of water. And we're just going to let that guy steep for a bit. So I really love the idea of buying fair trade. And in general, actually, I do buy chocolate fair trade as much as possible. When it comes to like Halloween or Easter, things like that, I do buy the mixed bags of candy. But if I'm doing s'mores, I will actually spring for the extra cost of buying those fair trade or organic chocolates. It's not because I care about the organic part. It is about the fair trade aspect. So fair trade is the process of working to attain more equitable practices in locations where colonialism and exploitation of those indigenous peoples that the conquering nations came in and encountered put them through. And so that created that foundation of the trade. And so fair trade tries to rectify that, or at least alleviate some of that strain. And so it's really about trying to help pay those farmers in those areas a little bit more and make sure that they are getting their fair due for the work that they put in to produce the products that we have come to depend on. And in general, I think it's a great endeavor. However, as I did a little bit of research about it, I learned that in actual practice, a lot of people who will be the packers, the people who actually distribute the goods in developed nations at least, tend to just pay the fair trade organization for the right to use the logo. So that made me a little more disillusioned. So now I'm going to have to do a little bit more research to confirm that what I do try to buy fair trade is actually fair trade and is not just a company slapping a label on it. On the part of the actual producers in those countries, the standards for fair trade are really high. So the people who actually oversee it, those standards are high. You have to pay everyone a salary that is at least the minimum wage. You cannot skimp on that. You have to make sure that the working conditions are fair, equitable, and safe. You cannot rely on forced or child labor, which is the predominant reason why when it comes to buying chocolate for just snacking on or for s'mores, I do try to buy fair trade because I would prefer to not support slave or child labor as much as possible. When there are profits in those areas, you do have to equally distribute all of those profits among all producers for that product. So with all of the ingredients in today's tea, for instance, the people who actually produce it, David's Tea, when they make a profit on that one, does, because they are certifying that that tea is fair trade, they do have to distribute those profits back to the actual producers evenly, which is a really wonderful endeavor. And I don't think that the practice of some companies just buying for the right to use a label takes away from the good of trying to do what you can. I don't think that there's anything bad about what David's Tea is doing. I'm certainly not condemning them. I don't know enough about them to know whether they're the kind of company that does just pay for the label or not. I still want to believe that anyone who goes through the process of getting fair trade certified is doing it for the right reasons. However, I do know that there have been companies, I read an article about it, Sainsbury's, it's a UK company, they removed their teas from the fair trade organization, and unclear entirely from reading the article exactly why, but it does look like the extra premiums that companies have to pay to be part of that fair trade organization is a factor. And certainly I don't begrudge companies wanting to do what's most efficient for them, because obviously they're in it to make a profit. But that's then, of course, the downside of capitalism in general, is that it's going to look to cut expenses where you can. And if you don't have to buy fair trade, I understand why companies certainly wouldn't. But I think that that in general does still continue to make me personally respect companies that try to do fair trade wherever they can. And certainly it's interesting to see companies have products that are fair trade and aren't fair trade all at the same time. And I'm curious as to, what the actual cost of all of that is and what considerations they have going into that. But in general, I do think that fair trade is a good idea. And so I will continue to do my research on that and continue to try and promote fair trade where possible. All right, so that's good time as far as my steep goes. I know this video is already running a little long, but let's go ahead and check on that. So as I stir this tea bag here a little bit, you can absolutely see that it went from having that kind of gradient where it was very golden to very reddish. As soon as I stirred that red just picked up. So this is, again, exactly why rooibos gets that name as being a red tea. From my angle here, looking down at it, I can certainly see the concentrated bits of the red as I squeeze out my moisture here so I don't make a mess all over my counter. and just get all of that a little warm. So it is a really, really rich color here. I'm trying to angle it here in the camera so you can really see. It's a nice reddish ambery color. I think it's quite lovely. And by using that tea bag, I don't have any of the detritus having slipped through or anything like that. I just have pure, plain and simple tea that I can enjoy. So I will say I can still obviously smell it, but it's not nearly as, I think, easy to smell as yesterday's tea from a distance. Maybe it still is. But it also might be that I've just had the cinnamon around, so I'm a little more inoculated to it. So, inoculated, that is actually how to pronounce that word. So let's go ahead and have a sip. This one definitely does not shy away from that spice. And I mean, it's fortunate that the only real thing that I'm supposed to get out of this is going to be cinnamon. Because I don't really taste anything else. I want to say that I can kind of taste that apple note at the back, but that could also just be wishful thinking. It could also just be the rooibos. Rooibos is not really my favorite kind of tea in general. I always think it has a little bit of a funky taste to it, and it's because rooibos is not actually real tea. But rooibos does not have any caffeine content, so this is going to actually be one that would be a perfect kind of chai to enjoy later in the evening, especially if you're looking for that kind of warm, wintry spice kind of tea. Now it is chai, which means that it is tea. Chai does mean tea. So if you're talking about a chai tea, you're saying tea. And of course, you say that fast enough and you're going to make a bunch of teenage boys giggle somewhere. So do that at your own risk. But most chais I know are served with milk, but for the purpose of the review here, I'm just trying to taste it for what it is. If I get another steep out of that bag, which I think I probably could, I might actually go ahead and add almond milk to that and see what I think it does for the flavor. But in general, this is a really nice, truly a nice warming kind of beverage. Again, I'm not a big fan of that rooibos aftertaste, but in general, I really, I could see myself drinking this one, especially if I'm trying to watch my caffeine later at night and get ready for bed, but I still want to have the process of having a cup of tea before bed. So there's that. And thank you again for tuning in to a long rambling video. I'm working on it. I will see you tomorrow. Bye.